If you've ever felt guilty eating a bowl of pasta, this episode is your apology letter from diet culture and your permission slip from two research based health coaches with over 20 years of one on one coaching experience.
Welcome back to the Overt Thinking Podcast, the show for women navigating fitness and health in a world that makes everything way more complicated than it needs to be.
We're your hosts. I'm Bri.
And I'm Kelsie.
And if you're here, chances are you are sick and tired of overthinking every fitness trend that demands us to shrink and has us feeling like we're failing at a system that never wanted to see us win.
This podcast is your space for honest conversations and evidence-based guidance so you can stop spiraling and finally live the healthy, full life you know you deserve.
And today we are diving headfirst into the battle against carbs because truthfully, we are sick and tired of it. We are sick and tired of carbs being lied about and holding women back from the gains they deserve. So, Kelsie, let's just set the scene. Why did carbs get a bad rep?
We need to travel back in time for a minute to where it all began. It's 1972. Dr. Robert Atkins began publishing diet books, his first one selling 15 million copies, which established the Atkins brand and marketing empire. Even if you didn't grow up in those decades, 70s, 80s, 90s, you have probably heard the Atkins name. He pushed a remarkable idea for that time that if people ate fat, high protein, and significantly minimized carbs, they would be trim and slender. The biggest appeal of this diet wasn't actually the elimination of carbs itself. It was the fact that he essentially said, if you remove carbs, the calories are unimportant. Eat whatever you want as long as it's not carbs. So that encouraged gluttony. People essentially followed a diet while loading up on fried chicken and butter and eggs and steak and cheese. Sounding familiar?
Yes, because so much of what we know now, you might imagine the complications for a diet like this on our health. Carbohydrates give us so many nutrients, and this is not and carbs are also like your primary energy source for your brain. And this is a perfect segue into how carbs are actually used. This sounds largely familiar to the keto craze. And I fell very victim to that mindset of like, I can just eat as many calories as I want as long as it's keto. And especially if it says keto on the bag, right? And that's like where so many of like the calorie bombs were happening. And I remember during the pandemic, I was doing hardcore keto. I was like pricking my finger every day,
Oh my
tracking
God.
everything. Yeah, I was like eating chicharrones because I was like craving a crunch. Everything's just like soft and like meat when you're in keto. But I really only achieved ketosis for like 5 days out of like the 5 months that I did it. And we'll talk about why that is. But so much of the carb demonizing came from these years of the 70s, but then was truly perpetuated through 70s, 80s, and 90s, especially like when we were growing up. Like a lot of our moms and parents were really afraid of carbs, like low carb, low sugar, and we're just kind of over consuming other calories.
It seems like every decade has like their own version of the villain, right? Like there was a
Yes.
time when I was a new trainer where it was sodium. Like everybody was afraid of sodium. Don't eat too much sodium. You got to stay under 2,300 milligrams a day, which is true. Yes. But sodium from salt is not the same as sodium in your processed foods. We could do a whole other episode on that, but carbs are a lot of the same. So a
Yes.
lot of this rhetoric around carbs is kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So people are afraid of carbohydrates because if you're a part of this narrative, they're afraid of the insulin response.
Right.
They're saying like, oh, well, eating carbs spikes your insulin. Maybe drastically if you're eating carbs in isolation, but in a mixed meal, one that includes protein, fat, fiber, vegetables, all of that, the insulin response isn't going to be as drastic as, say, eating a cookie by itself. So that insulin response is actually a completely normal biological reaction that we want.
We actually want that.
Yeah, and how sensitive your cells respond to insulin ultimately determines your insulin resistance or lack thereof.
Yeah. So, like, if your cells respond efficiently to the glucose that you're eating, that is insulin sensitivity, like a well-oiled machine. It's sensitive, it notices the glucose, it releases insulin. Insulin resistance means that the machine is rusty or it's not quite converting properly. And as we age, insulin sensitivity naturally declines, aka we get less sensitive to insulin as we get older, and especially post perimenopause.
So, like, when you eat a mixed meal, glucose enters the bloodstream, your pancreas excretes insulin, which then and also enters your bloodstream, and then the cells receive it. So that is things like your red blood cells, your skeletal muscle cells, your brain cells. All of those take in insulin, and like you said, as you age, those things can be desensitized. But there are things that we can do to improve that sensitivity.
What do you think it is? Because it's our favorite thing to do. Muscle mass is the number one modifiable lever for improving insulin sensitivity. So, resistance training plus protein, especially with a little bit of progressive overload sprinkled on there, that is the fix. So, there is a study that showed that women who ate high quality carbs in midlife had up to 37% greater chance of aging without chronic disease, cognitive decline, or physical limitations. So, what this shows us is that those women are these women, and maybe some of us, who are super ultra afraid of carbs. We're actually putting ourselves in a bigger risk if we're not eating a balanced amount of carbs throughout the day and also just throughout our life. When we go through these seasons of completely cutting out carbs or cutting out food groups, our body really doesn't like it. It's stressful for our body. So if you actually become friends with carbs, and I was afraid of carbs for a long time. So every time I had a little bit, I'd have a lot. But then the moment I started getting more consistent with carbs, and it's like, well, I got to have a carb at this meal, it just decreased that or
Ev-
just like or even just like the mental craving for it. Like, oh, I can't have carbs. So like I got to restrict. And then when
Well,
I
you're
just start
essentially putting that thing on a pedestal if you take it away.
Yes, and then having it more consistently was like, "Oh, yeah, this is just part of it." And
I
so
actually I have a client story about this. So my one of my clients, she is turning 70 this year. We did a DEXA scan early last year, and what we saw was her bone mass was actually not great. She's been training for a while. She's only been with me probably a year and a half at this point. So when we did that DEXA, that was something that stood out to me. I was like, we need to address this. And coincidentally, at the same time, she had just gotten her labs done from her doctor. She also had really high LDL cholesterol. So I was
interesting.
like, some of the things that we can do nutritionally outside of, the weightlifting, we're going to continue doing exactly what we're doing. Nothing changes here. But she has a very strong history of fearing carbs. She grew up, obviously, in the 60s and 70s and 80s with all of this rhetoric around don't eat carbs. They're going to make you overweight. If you want to be trim and slender, you need to avoid carbs. So it took a lot of conversations of here's why we need to have a little bit of carbs in your diet. I was like, first, if you're afraid of it, we don't need to go whole hog. What I want you to do is just every morning have a cup of oats, not a quarter cup, not a half cup. I want you to have one full cup of oats because that is a normal adult sized portion. And I want you to add a tablespoon of chia seeds and maybe have it with a little serving of protein, whether that's a protein powder or a couple chicken sausages on the side. Pair that into a mixed meal. That's your breakfast. Cool. Funny enough, guess what her labs did? Her LDL cholesterol improved.
Of course. So not only eating breakfast, but eating a little bit of carbs, and especially carbs with higher fiber. I mean, I think that's a huge piece of it because simple versus complex carbs and timing really, really matters. And I think that example just perfectly showcases that. So we know that not all carbs are built the same. So we're going to teach you how to strategically use them instead of just eating clean and praying. So what you did, Kelsey, which is so awesome, is you gave her not only just a recipe to follow, you also showed her like, okay, complex carbs in the morning helps kind of delay your satiety, also delays blood sugar regulation or supports blood sugar regulation. Also pairing it with a fat with the chia seeds and a protein with the protein powder or chicken apple sausage. That's what we mean when we say balanced. And it doesn't matter if you have a simple carb. I know simple carbs have been kind of demonized, but really all simple means is it just has one glucose molecule. So what these simple carbs do is they have a fast spike. These are best around workouts, like not 10 p.m. on the couch, but like when you can use them functionally for performance. Simple carbs are great. That's why you actually see bodybuilders, or people in the gym eating gummy bears or Swedish fish sometimes because they want that quick hit of glucose. However, what you were suggesting was complex carbs because there's a slower burn, it's more fiber, and it keeps her blood sugar stable. And so when we think of these higher fiber foods, her labs got better because her blood sugar regulation was better, and she was probably able to train harder too, right?
Oh yeah, she definitely felt better in the gym for sure. I think there's something important to be said here too. Like, nothing exists in a vacuum, right? Like, we are very rarely eating one macronutrient in isolation. Most meals or most things that you eat, you're probably eating a couple different things at once, right? Unless you're eating like maybe a banana pre workout for your 6 a.m. training. Okay, that's a great option to do right before a workout because it is a simple carb. You'll have that immediate glucose to use in that workout, but you don't need to overcomplicate it.
Carbs do feel complicated because there's this whole ideation around like a simple carb versus a complex carb. And then we have glycemic index where it's, the impact of that carb on your system. But really what we want you to think about is just the relationship of carbs to fiber. That's going to be your North Star. Even if you Google like, if it's simple or complex carb, that's just going to give you clear insight into when you should be having this carb. If it's a little bit more of a simple carb, use it when you need quick energy. So when we have, breakfast and then you go into a long day of work and you won't eat until 12, yeah, you're going to want to prioritize more complex carbs in the morning time so that you just feel a little bit more regulated. Also, as you mentioned, pairing a carb with a fat or pairing a carb with a protein also helps your body release a little bit of leptin, which is that satiety hormone as well. So if we pair more balanced meals, especially in the morning, it's going to kind of delay the release of that glucose so that you can stay more energized throughout the day.
And I think this fear of carbs is a big reason why people looking for weight loss feel stuck because they've constantly heard throughout their life, like, don't eat carbs if you want to be trim and slender. But so then you eat a salad, maybe a little portion of protein, while not a lot of calories in that meal, you're probably going to be gravitating for a snack sooner because you don't have that fiber that's slowing digestion from that salad and protein that you just consumed. So even adding like a half cup of a grain, whether it's quinoa, whether it's brown rice, whether it's a pasta, adding just a little bit of extra carbs that include fiber can delay that digestion, slow your gastric emptying, keeping you fuller longer so that you don't reach for another meal, ultimately keeping your calories controlled by the end of the day.
I think that's a huge point. The gastric emptying, like having more complex carbs, what that essentially means, it keeps you fuller longer. You've just got more matter in your gut so that your body is perceiving that there's more matter in your stomach. So it keeps you fuller longer. The other part of that is that the snacking part. I noticed this so much at True Health. Like our mom's generations are like a half of a sandwich is a meal. And you're like,
No,
okay,
girl.
it's not. Or
You're
like 2 eggs is a breakfast. It's like, no, it's not. I can ram my head into the wall because you know what you're gonna do after those 2 eggs? You're gonna be hungry at 9 AM. You're gonna be hungry at 9 AM. You're gonna have a little tiny baby snack because you're still running primarily on cortisol. So you can dismiss your hunger signals quite a bit in the morning. Then you get to lunchtime, and lunchtime is supposed to be a small salad or a half a sandwich or a soup and a half a sandwich. That's not enough food. So then by the time you get to the witching hour, which is when your cortisol is starting to tank around like 2 to 5 p.m. in that happy hour window, that's when your melatonin curve is starting to rise as well. And it kind of peaks about an hour after the sun goes down. So in that window, that is when your willpower and also your willpower is going to be at its lowest. And also, you've been fighting this white knuckle fight all morning. So, not having complex carbs in the morning makes you very starving the rest of the day. And if we make our meals like little popper small meals, you are going to be the person who's constantly afraid of carbs because you're constantly going to be reaching for those hyper palatable, high carb and high fat snacks that are not functional and actually keep you feeling more stuck. So, if you're listening to this, proper nutrition starts in the morning and actually starts with a meal that is about a third of your total calories for the day.
Right. Front load all the things that you need to do first. And then when you get to the end, you don't have to try to fill the gaps. Exactly what you're saying reminds me of a very common instance I have with a lot of clients where I'll be like, "Oh, you went out this weekend. What did you have for dinner?" "Oh, I was really bad. My husband and I had pasta." I'm like, "Okay, there's nothing wrong with that."
When did you have the pasta? What
Did
type of
you
pasta? I have so many questions.
Well, did you have it with a protein? Was it like a shrimp pasta? Was it a
Yes.
beef spaghetti? Great. That's an amazing meal because you got a protein. You probably had a little bit of veggies from the sauce. You had a carb. That sounds like a great meal to me. If it's just a pasta, like if you go to Italy, we talked about this on the Greece episode. If you go to Italy and you have like one sheet of prosciutto, like yes, you're going to be starving and you're probably going to feel a little bit tired because you're a little bit bogged down from the carbs just sitting in your stomach. There's not really anything to like keep you full and going. So, if you are going to have a high carb meal, pair it with a protein. And I think about breakfast or brunch a lot too. The people who go out and order like pancakes, if
Yes.
you just order the pancakes, maybe with like a side of sausage or like a
Egg
couple over
whites.
easy eggs or egg white scramble and the pancakes, great. That's a perfect breakfast to me.
That's what's so crazy is like people will sit down and be like, okay, I want pancakes. And I'm like, always get the table cakes, right? When you go out to breakfast, get a table cake so everyone gets a little sweet treat, a little bite. But if you are really wanting to have that table cake and you're like, I should save my calories. No, do not do that. Always have a protein with it, especially a protein you can chew. The more like indulgent whatever it is that you want to have is, then the more I want you chewing protein with it. And in fact, if you eat your protein first or have a couple bites of the protein first, it acts as kind of a natural GLP-1. So it helps regulate when you are actually done. I do want to touch on something you were saying, like, well, what did you eat? And she's like, I had pasta. And I'm like, if she had pasta before a big night out, I'd be like, hell yeah, because that would help preserve your gains. And we talked about this a lot on our previous Fit and Feral episodes. But alcohol is not necessarily quote unquote bad. Yes, the dose is the poison for everything. But the reason why alcohol is tough on our system is because alcohol is treated like an invader in your body. So instead of your body, so if you did a big workout and then you go and drink after, your body's going to now prioritize metabolizing that alcohol first before it's actually going to do the muscle protein synthesis and like repair your muscle tissue. So the fact that she had a meal before she went out is also something we talk about too, because now that alcohol is not just going to be the only thing her body's running on. She actually has some carbs to run on. She has some protein to fuel her muscles with. And even if she has a couple drinks, her body's still going to be using that fuel as opposed to if you didn't have anything at all. And the other thing about alcohol is that when we track it, which I think is important for us to talk about, like tracking alcohol in my Fitness Pal or chronometer, I always do alcohol as carbs or alcohol as fat. And then that way, whatever calories you have left, you can kind of like decide how you want to track them, but you can't just not track it. You got to like, if you're tracking your food, put it in there because it's a very important thing to learn how it kind of works with the rest of your log for that day.
Yeah.
And also, alcohol does disrupt blood sugar regulation for about 24 hours after. So, when we are drinking, it is even more important to have some carbs, some timing of food as part of your fit and feral plan.
And hydration. So, which also ties into the carbs as well, because if you're intaking a lot of carbs and fiber, you might start to notice, oh, I'm getting backed up in the bathroom. But in order to keep things moving, keep your motility healthy, you need enough water.
Let's talk briefly fiber. There's two types. So there's insoluble fiber and then there's soluble. And one of them actually provides bulk and like kind of pulls toxins out of your gut. Soluble fiber actually dissolves in water, so it helps slow digestion, it helps regulate blood sugar and lower cholesterol like your client. But insoluble fiber does not dissolve. So it actually provides bulk into your stool and speeds up the passage of your food. And it actually helps prevent constipation. So, two different types of fiber. So, one, if you are noticing you're a little bit more backed up, then you might be eating more soluble fiber. But if you want to move that through, then you want to make sure you have things like insoluble fiber.
I have a client that dry scoops psyllium husk. I can't imagine anything more gangster, really.
Wow. And if you've never had Slim Husk, it basically is like, you know how chia seeds just get, like, gelatinous and, like, jelly? That's exactly what it looks like.
Psyllium husk is like if you had some sawdust and you put it in your mouth and you tried to swallow it.
Remember the cinnamon challenge where you put a table of cinnamon and you're like
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember this video, like, one of the videos on YouTube that we had growing up. It was, like, this really, like, hot girl or something. It was like, "Can a hot girl do the cinnamon challenge and still be hot?" And, like, at the end, it's like, "Yep, still hot." She just, like, puffs it out everywhere.
Have you done a dry scoop of pre-workout in the last
Yeah.
year or 2?
No, because I don't take pre-workouts, so I don't have access to it, but I have done it in the past. Yeah.
I love a dry scoop. I mean, I'm reckless. I love it.
I know you do.
Alright,
You
let's
live
get back
fast,
on
die
topic.
young. So I know that our keto listeners or keto proponents are probably seething. So we want to touch on this briefly. We are not here to cancel anything necessarily if you love it. We are here to just be honest about the real cost of doing keto and why it could potentially work in the beginning. So keto
Or for some
essentially.
women and not others, long term even.
Yeah, and I honestly wouldn't really recommend it for most women. And like we said in the beginning, like there is a lot of complications that may not be readily seen by following a high keto diet, like increasing blood lipids, for example, increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So keto works by forcing fat oxidation in the absence of glucose. So essentially, your body doesn't get the glucose specifically from carbs, so therefore to it converts proteins or other sources to make glucose because that's what our bodies run on. In the short term, you might see dramatic results like, oh, wow, I lost 10 pounds in a few weeks. You might have these very dramatic results. And the reason behind that is for every gram of carb, there is 3 to 4 grams of water required to process and store those. So hence the loss of water weight. So it's not that you lost 10 pounds of fat in a couple weeks. It's
Or
generally
inflammation.
it's generally water weight and an inflammation that is lost very quickly. And so that's why it has this kind of like positive feedback loop of look at the success. It happened so fast. It must be the way. But those changes are not long term. And for women, those complications might look like increased risk of cardiovascular disease, hormonal disruption, impaired recovery, muscle loss risk. So ultimately, your training starts to suffer, your mental acuity starts to suffer, all of the complications that you don't really want.
And eating too little of carbs too long also affects your thyroid. So it can cause low mood, brain fog, and weight gain. So that keto plateau is actually just your thyroid kind of tapping out. And similar on the other end, when keto works for like a week or two and then stops working, that's a very important trigger. That's an important thing to know because your body's hormones are very sensitive to carbohydrate restriction. Essentially, like it sends a ton of cortisol and a thyroid response when we're not giving it appropriate types of fuel at the right times. So if you're in like a strength training build or you've hired a coach and you're trying to put some muscle on or trying to increase muscle, decrease body fat, and you're like, I'm taking my carbs out, you're actually going to you're gonna try to drive your car without any fuel. No gas, no engine. You're just trying to, like, push the car along. So, if we restrict carbs too long, and this actually was something that happened to me, you'll get hypothalamic
And
amenorrhea.
one of
Um,
thyroid's biggest jobs is metabolism. So if we are constantly restricting carbohydrates and it's impacting your brain fog, your mood, and or even your period, your cycle, then we need to start to address things in the diet. Are you eating enough calories? Are you eating enough carbs to
are you
support
eating enough fiber?
everything that you're doing? And if the answer is no, then just getting your labs checked might tell you why, sure, but I would more likely want to address the lifestyle habits, do a dietary audit, do a program audit. Are you doing too much, eating too little? What's the balance between all the inputs? And your stress plays a huge role too. So if you're not recovering, you're not able to train very well because you're under depleting, you're overtraining, you're under recovering, your balance starts to shift and you're outweighing one side from the other, from your recovery, from your inputs.
And here's the other thing that unprocessed, like if you are in keto and you're in keto and you're eating excess protein, that's going to break down into glucose. And that's exactly why I could never get into ketosis, is because I was eating more than whatever it was, like 30% of my calories from protein. And the reality is that we want you guys eating protein. We want you eating lots of fiber. We want your system running well and being fueled with lots of minerals, nutrients, and also get you satiated. Like if you look at your plate, and this is like the big light bulb moment for me about ketos, I had like a steak and like 2 green beans. And I was like, that's it? Like, that sucks. And I was eating, all these other high volume foods that were just like more fat, And it's like, I could have like 3 macadamia nuts and 2 green beans and a big old thing of steak, but even the steak wasn't keto. So the quantity of my plate was really small. And what I love about eating carbs and being metabolically flexible, which means my body likes carbs and fats, which maybe we can get into in the bonus segment. But being more metabolically flexible requires you to be balanced in your approach with your nutrition. And so the way we can start this today is having a protein and a fat and a carb at every single meal. The high volume approach to nutrition was single-handedly one of the things that made my relationship to food more healthy. I had restricted so many foods and cut so many foods out of my diet and called them bad, so many carbs that were just bad. I cut them all out. That when I went into keto, I was like, "Oh, this feels normal here. We all don't like carbs." But then when I started seeing my plate get smaller and smaller and smaller and my hunger get bigger and bigger and bigger, I wasn't of the mindset that it was okay to have like leafy greens and things that were ultra low calorie but could have made my plate look a little bit bigger and also have me chewing longer. So one thing about high volume food, and when we say high volume, it's like, higher plant matter, higher fiber, more bang for your buck stuff.
Lower
You're also,
calorie options.
yeah, lower calorie, but still usually high mineral nutrient density. When we have more of these foods, you're also chewing longer, and that mechanical digestion helps release leptin, that satiety hormone. And carbs are actually lower calorie than fats. And I think that's important to add here because the reason why people got keto wrong is because protein and carbs, for every 1 gram of protein and carbs, that's 4 calories. But every gram of fat is 9 calories. Alcohol is like 7, based on some nutrition math. But what you need to know is people are just like, more isn't just better. You still have to stay within a calorie threshold that is appropriate for your body's basal metabolic rate and your activity levels. So what you were saying in the beginning about Atkins, just like eat as much as you want, that's not going to work here.
Yeah.
And if you've been frustrated by keto or different, diets in the past, it's because they weren't doing the basics well.
Yeah, they're missing the forest for the trees or throwing the baby out with the bathwater, whichever idiom sits well for you.
Yes.
So, how many carbs should we eat?
Say like, like traditional, like if you know what your TEE is and you're eating 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, then you have the amount that's left over, you need to have an appropriate ratio between carbs and fat relative to the type of intensity you're doing.
Mhm.
So if you are a 150-pound woman and your goal is to recomp your body, which is most of us, right? We want to increase our muscle mass while not eating so much where we're gaining body fat. We're actually able to lose some body fat. That's called body recomposition. I would start someone broad strokes, 150-pound woman, you need 150 grams of protein. There's a range here, but then after that 150 grams of protein, which is taking up about 600 calories, if you use, there's so many calculators online to determine what your TDEE is, which is your total daily energy expenditure. Once you know how much energy your body burns at rest, your basal metabolic rate, plus your activity multiplier, so how much activity you do in a day and also the type of activity, you'll figure out how many calories you need for the day. So a 150-pound woman is going to need 150 grams of protein, which is about 600 calories. So then if she's eating about 2,000 calories a day, then she has about 1,400 calories left to kind of disperse between carbs and fats.
So, you're using 1 gram per pound of protein is the goal. This is an interesting recommendation for carbohydrates that I just looked up through the NSCA. The recommended intake for athletes is 5 to 10 grams per kilogram per day of carbohydrates, which is going to be higher than the average general adult population. So one might surmise that maybe the average population might consume, say, 2 to 5 grams per kilogram a day of carbohydrates.
Interesting, because that for me would be 340 grams of carbs, and that would be about 1,300 calories.
If you're someone who tends to like higher fat foods, like, say, peanut butter, salmon, yeah, I'd probably lean on the fat because that's what you prefer. But
Right.
if you're someone that loves carbs, you love to have bread and you love to have pasta, then yeah, I don't really see a problem with fat going low as long as it's still above your 20% daily average of your calories, because that 20% of your total fat is how much we need to make your hormones. So if your nutrition is starting to impact things that is related to your hormones, like your reproduction, your mental acuity, then we need to address some of the dietary components. But it's hard to say like a general, like, oh, this is too low for everyone. It's just hard. It's hard to say.
Yeah. I mean, just based on the clients I worked with, like, even if you're like 110 pounds, like, I would still say that 45 grams of fat is like a little low. Fat is the cholesterol and fat is the precursor to hormones. And
It
I
just
have had,
depends because your TDE is related to how tall you are, how much you weigh, how old you are.
yes, all those things. And if you are, eating enough for what your body's needs are, I mean, there's very few people where a 1,200 calorie diet's gonna gonna work for anyone.
So
Okay.
I know we got a little conversational there and it might have been a little confusing, but the rules that we want you to follow are 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein, 2 to 6 grams per kilogram of carbs, and 20 to 30% of your total calories from fat.
And if we do the math, because I like having a frame of reference. So like a 150-pound woman, that's about 68 kilograms. So that times two is 136 grams of protein, which may be a little lower, right, than the one gram of protein per pound of body weight. But again, it's a range. So 136 grams of protein. And then if we multiply that 68 kilograms by 3 to 6, that's about 204 to 408 grams of carbs, which is a huge range and is largely based on your performance. So the type of performance you're doing. And then if we're doing this based off, like, say, a 2,500 calorie diet, that means that if I add the protein and the carbs, what I have left is about 500 calories. And we know that about 20% of your daily TDEE should come from fat at the minimum. So this lowest end of fat is going to be about 56 grams. So for a 150-pound person, women listening to this are probably like, I would never eat 408 grams of carbs. But the reality is that 81% of female athletes are eating well below the recommended carbohydrate intake. And this is why the system is broken, is that even the best of the best athletes wonder why they're exhausted and wonder why they don't look like the athletes that they are, is because we are not eating enough carbs, which is directly the fuel that your body needs to do performance and also muscle protein synthesis.
So, if you've been subscribing to the idea that carbs make you fat, or you're coming around to the idea of including carbs in your diet, or maybe your mom still is afraid of carbs, send this episode to her, send it to a friend that you know would appreciate this message.
The goal is carb periodization, not carb elimination. More on training days, a little bit less, but not none on rest days. Your body already knows what to do. You just have to stop fighting it and start listening to it. Please follow us on Instagram at overt_thinking podcast, at Brianna Lamb, and at Kelsey Michelle. And you can watch this video live on YouTube and Spotify. And we will see you in the next
episode.
episode.